Colombia, cocaine, and crime. What do they all have in common? They all played a significant role in the life of one of the most notorious and successful drug traffickers and narco-terrorists in the world, Pablo Emmanuel Escobar Gavieri, more simply known as Pablo Escobar. With a 17-year-long reign sitting at the top of the Colombian cocaine empire, Escobar at the peak of his success was named Forbes magazine's seventh richest man in the world. Not surprisingly, considering he was making a whopping $30 billion a year, raking in over $1 million a day. With over a dozen films about his life, a successful Netflix original series, which happens to be the inspiration for why I chose Escobar, and also an entire industry dedicated to giving tours about him and exploring past owned real estate and more, Escobar still remains a well-known icon in global history, continuing his legacy 25 years later. But in order to understand how Escobar got his fame and fortune, we must rewind and learn how he got to where he is today. In a small middle-class city just 45 minutes out of Medellin, in Rio Negro, Colombia, Abel de Jesus Escobar Echeverri, a simple cattle farmer, and Hermela de Ayos de la Rosa Gaviera Bero, a schoolteacher, on December 1st, 1949, had their then second child, Pablo Escobar, who would turn out to be one out of 7 children. Both of his parents were hardworking individuals that raised their children well, but all their hard work couldn't shield their kids from the prominent crime that surrounded them in the city. Rio Negro's economy was fueled by the dominant marijuana and cocaine trade occurring during the time. Although not everyone was directly involved in the drug trade, almost all residents were involved through knowing someone who was directly working in this business and protecting them in many different capacities. Additionally, as a result of this trade, violence became a very prominent issue. However, Escobar did not stay in Rio Negro for long due to the fact that his mother had intentions to establish an elementary school, so as a result the family packed up their bags and moved to Embago. In early life, Escobar was very active in sports, especially soccer, and exhibited normal behavior for children his age. He was described by many who knew him as being a driven and ambitious young man with dreams to one day become the president of Colombia. As he grew older, he became very active in social movements as a result of his teachers' influences. He started to assist in the struggle for class equality, and by the time he was in his early teens, Escobar was attending street rallies and participating in activities such as throwing rocks at police. However, following his 17th birthday, he was forced to drop out of school due to the fact that his parents could no longer pay for his education, but additionally, he felt bored with the straight-laced routine. As a result of this, he started his own small bicycle repair shop, and after being somewhat successful with his little business, he changed his career path to more criminal acts. He began stealing headstones from the local cemetery, sandblasting the names from them, and then reselling them, which is seen to be origins of his crime. Alternatively, Sebastian, Escobar's son, later in life claims that his father's origin to crime began with him selling counterfeit high school diplomas and awards. Eventually, Escobar realized that commercial robbery was the way to quick cash. Additionally, Escobar was committing petty street scams such as selling fake lottery tickets, stealing cars, and selling contraband cigarettes. He eventually got caught and spent several months in jail. Once out of jail and back on the streets, Escobar continued back in his criminal lifestyle, this time moving on to bigger crimes. One of the most helpful in his career was the kidnapping of Diego Echeverri, a very wealthy businessman that was extremely disliked by the Medellin's poor workers. Additionally, Echeverri's family had agreed to pay a $50,000 ransom demand, but Escobar and his allies decided to still murder him. This deed made Escobar very well liked by Medellin's common folk because it was seen as Escobar striking a blow for social equality. By the 1960s, he had become involved in the drug trafficking business as a small part-time marijuana dealer and gunman. He also made a business through kidnapping wealthy businessmen and collecting ransom money for price tags as high as $100,000. Now by the 70s, he had set a strong foundation for his drug trafficking lifestyle, which is perfect timing considering the demand for cocaine in the United States had skyrocketed. By the age of 22, Escobar had begun working for the Medellin-based cartel. This cartel had dominated the cocaine industry, earning an estimated $420 million a week, and making its leaders some of the wealthiest people in the world. Taking this into consideration, Escobar decided that he wanted a piece of the pie for himself, and later, after working for the cartel for half a decade, reportedly ordered for the murder of the cartel's leader, Fabio Restrepo. Now Escobar was in charge, and this initiated his power surge, and were some of the beginning steps of eventually gaining him the title of King of Cocaine. Now in control, Escobar was in charge of all organized crime in Medellin, and responsible for as much as 80% of the cocaine being transported into the U.S. He built a reputation for not only killing rivals and opponents and their families, but also personally murdering uncooperative subordinates. During this time, he married his then 15-year-old wife, Maria Victoria Hino Valio, and eventually started a family with 2 children. In May of 1976, Escobar, along with some of his workers, were arrested for smuggling a shipment of cocaine paste coming back from Ecuador. Although he was arrested, the case eventually got dropped due to Escobar's successful bribing and threats. Fast forwarding to 1982, Escobar was elected to Colombia's Congress. He now seemingly had it all, a happy family, as well as criminal, economic, and political power. Unfortunately, his career in politics did not last long due to the Minister of Justice calling him out for his association and involvement with the drug industry, in which Colombia was trying to fight against. Once Escobar had had him assassinated, it truly showed not only Colombia but the world that Escobar would eliminate any challenges in his path to success. However, he was simultaneously described as a modern-day Robin Hood as a result of his charitable work that he did for Colombia's impoverished communities. He built a soccer stadium, planted trees, even built an entire neighborhood in a rural community for low-income individuals to live in. He had gained the love and support of the lower class of Colombia, which made up the majority of the demographic. Furthermore, by this time, Escobar and the Medellin cartel had gained control of the processing aspects of cocoa for cocaine in Bolivia and Peru, as well as being the lead drug traffickers for approximately 80% of the world. Additionally, during this time, the National Crusade Against Drugs had officially begun in the United States, and cocaine had been a high priority for the DEA. But nonetheless, although wanted by the U.S. government, Escobar would soon shortly not be wanted by his allies and peers, as his support system would soon dwindle down as his reign was coming to an end. Escobar had begun a 5-month-long reign of terror for Colombia, starting with the assassination of Luis Carlos Galán, the leading presidential candidate who was seen as a hero in Colombia. He was killed due to the fact that he ran a very strong anti-narcotics campaign. Shortly following this tragedy, one of the worst disasters to happen in Colombia was the bombing of the Avianca Airlines flight, which killed 110 people. This illustrated that Escobar showed no respect towards the government or people of Colombia. And as if these major events were not enough, Escobar later had the headquarters of the DAS bombed. These instances finally made the Colombian government realize that Escobar needed to be stopped. Although the Colombian government had known that the U.S. government had been on a mission to stop Escobar for quite some time, they still did not directly cooperate just yet. Eventually, in 1990, Escobar agreed to surrender once he had gotten a guarantee that the Colombian government would absolutely not extradite him to the U.S. and that he would have to serve a greatly reduced term in a cushioned prison built especially for him. He essentially built a country club for himself in which he was able to continue his business. During his time here, he had killed many of his allies who he had believed double-crossed him. This was the last straw for many and caused for Escobar to lose the last of his support from his workers. In 1991, Escobar had escaped this prison, which led to a 16-month-long manhunt. With little to no allies, all previously owned property seized by the government, and a continuous target on his back, Escobar was on the run and forced to fend for himself. Eventually, on December 2nd, 1993, the Colombian and U.S. armed forces were able to surprise attack Escobar at a hideout, and later he died in the crossfire at the age of 43. Although he specialized primarily in drug trafficking, Escobar demonstrated that he was capable of committing many crimes. Throughout his life, his offenses escalated in severity as well as frequency. In observing the age curve of Escobar, he varies from the typical individual that are used to explain this model, in that he started off offending at a very young age and never stopped until he was killed. Even though Escobar had the social bonds and societal institutions that should have seemingly prevented him from continuing criminal ways, he still carried on. Evidence supports the notion that the early onset of criminality is in the fact that he had poor parental discipline and monitoring, contributing to the pattern of criminal and deviant behavior. Although Escobar's parents tried to shield him from the outside crime that was surrounding him, they seemed to show little care for when their son was doing the crime. It is believed that at a young age, Escobar's mother even stated to him that if he was going to commit a crime, to not be stupid and don't get caught, showing support rather than trying to deter him. A collaboration of theories is the best way I think can assist in having a better understanding of the criminal patterns of Escobar. In learning about group patterns and individual trajectories, we learn that the probability to partake in particular experiences is higher if an individual has been exposed to them, which is extremely pertinent in Escobar's case, considering he grew up in a city that had normalized crime, and violence and drug trafficking were very prominent issues. Additionally, in relating to Sampson and Lobb's argument about pertinence and dissonance and discussion about the life course perspective, they state we must focus on a full life course, and especially in terms of social context. From growing up as a child with crime surrounding them, to destructive and radical riots being the only way to fight for social equality as an adolescent, to crime being the quickest and simplest way to make a living as an adult. These in consideration with the fact that his social bonds that were allegedly supposed to yield him from committing crime supported him, show how Escobar was essentially set up to be a criminal. Furthermore, Sampson and Lobb conclude by stating the idea of turning points playing a central role in the theory, especially when linked with the interaction of human agency, life course events, situations, and historical context. As emphasized by Paternoster and Pogorzelski's reading on general theory, human agency fixates on the intentional goal-focused behavior for which Escobar it was to achieve high success and power. Life course and situations for him included the fact that he had to drop out of school and that all of his peers that were no longer in school also committed crime, which pays an ode to Ward's theory of companionship and crime. And the historical context being the cocaine was a growing industry at the time, and being involved was the only way to make it big. I think that we should consider the circumstances of Escobar and his life in trying to figure out a solution. Had there been stronger institutional structures available for Escobar to rely on, it probably could have drawn him away from crime. This solution could have included affordable school system, more pragmatic ways for fighting for social equality, and other ways of releasing tension rather than drug use. In accordance with Merton's adaptation to strength theory, Escobar would have fallen in the innovation category because he accepted the cultural values and goals but rejected the institutional means of achieving them. So thus, if alternative means had been instilled in the society, it could have been possible for Escobar to have conformed and not continued his pattern of offending. However, Escobar's situation was very unique. Had the Colombian government been more cooperative and made stronger efforts early in his career to stop him, he could potentially not have gotten as far. Personally, considering the uniqueness and rarity of Escobar's case, I don't think there's any policy changes that could have been implemented, but rather we should learn from it. For when we see the wrongdoers in charge, that's when we shall see our society begin to fall.